What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with a way too early look at our top 12 running back rankings. Obviously, last week, if you guys haven't checked it out already, we did a way too early mock draft of the first two rounds and some honorable mentions. Today, we're going to be basically looking at the running back landscape, and we will do the same thing tomorrow with wide receivers as well. We're not going to talk quarterbacks or tight ends, but basically what we're going to be doing is kind of projecting forward into next year. I'm sure a lot of you guys, if you had a week 17 or an 18 championship, your fantasy season is now over. Hopefully you brought home the gold, but I'm sure a lot of you guys are degenerates like us and you want to start thinking about next year already. So that's basically what we're doing. We're just going to talk about our way too early rankings, see kind of how things have changed from what happened this year and what we kind of project into the future. So if you enjoy this video, as always, like, comment, subscribe. Danny, how you doing today?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, this is going to be a fun look ahead into what exactly is going to, not transpire fully because, again, we're still making our predictions, but what could transpire this offseason. Obviously, projecting a lot towards maybe these young guys start planning these old vets. And we were talking before the video started that this was really the main discussion in how to value these running backs. Where are we putting these 26, 27, 28-year-old veterans versus these up-and-coming 21, 22, 23-year-old running backs? You guys will find out today, obviously, because we have come to a consensus on exactly where we're valuing these guys. But it's going to be definitely fun discourse in this comment section because there's going to be a lot of you that disagree and a lot of you that agree in these comments.
Yeah, no doubt. And we're talking about how to evaluate these guys' ceilings as well. And their age plays a big part of that, as I talked about last week in the running back league winners kind of recap that I talked about already. So before we get into this, as always, we got to hit the intro. So, way too early running back rankings. You guys should see our consensus on the screen as of right now. We're going to start with the 101, the guy who finishes the running back one this year, the guy who is the only league-winning running back in terms of half PPR points per game, put up, I believe it was 21.4 half PPR points per game this year, and that's Jonathan Taylor, running back for the Indianapolis Colts. Again, there's a lot to say about Jonathan Taylor of why, maybe he couldn't do this again because his quarterback is Carson Wentz. Offensive line injuries, plagued the Colts a little bit this year. And the offense in general was, stale at times. But at the same time, we're talking about a 23-year-old running back, 24-year-old running back at minimum next year, who has the breakaway speed that you look for, has the big play upside that you look for, averaged nearly 6 yards per carry this year on the ground as well. Doesn't get, quite the level of receiving work that we would like to see him get because he's just that good. He should get the ball on every single play, to be honest. But Jonathan Taylor, I don't think you can really make an argument that he isn't the 101. I know we're going to talk about, CMC when he's on the field and some other guys here, but I think with Jonathan Taylor's ability alone, it's just hard not to rank him at 101 with the offense that he plays and with the line he has and the scoring opportunity that we saw from him this year.
Yeah, and again, you mentioned his overall total season point per game output, but we do remember, again, if you guys had Jonathan Taylor those first few weeks of the year where this Colts offense could not score the ball in the red zone to save their life, after that, following that, week 4 and on, I mean, this is a guy that has averaged nearly 24 full PPR points per game, which would easily pace the league. You're talking about like a 3-point point per game discrepancy ahead of Austin Ekeler. Like, this is a legitimate league-winning type of asset, a better version of what we've seen Dalvin Cook be these past couple of years, and there's no reason to think anything's going to change because, let's be honest here, although he doesn't get a CMC, Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler level receiving workload, I mean, this is still a locked and loaded 50, 60, 70 target guy. I do think that he can end up even reaching that 70 target threshold once this team realizes, let's be honest here, this offense runs through Jonathan Taylor. As we saw this past week, it does not run through Carson Wentz because they should have been in the playoffs right now. But anyways, I digress. We're going to leave that be. Jonathan Taylor is a stud real-life runner, gets adequate receiving work, and then let's talk about the touchdowns. 20 touchdowns in 17 games played this year, meeting that league-winning type of criteria that you have outlined really all season long. I mean, bread and butter, 101. Can't get any better than Jonathan Taylor here.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously that was the easy decision. Now comes the more difficult decisions. Do we go with the recency bias plays of just looking at who was the running backs this year that performed, whether it was Austin Ekeler, Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, some of the guys that finished in the top 5 this year? Or do we, project forward, take into account some of the injuries and the stuff that we have at our fingertips right now? Christian McCaffrey is the 102 for both of us. And again, we're assuming that you guys play in some kind of PPR format because Christian McCaffrey obviously gets a big benefit from that. But Christian McCaffrey, we've kind of said it before, we'll say it again, continuously throughout the offseason. We cannot predict ticky-tacky injuries. It's unfortunate that these happen to running backs all the time, but any running back, like Jonathan Taylor, could go out next year in week 2, sprain his ankle, high ankle sprain, he's out for 4 to 5 games. And then when he comes back, maybe he re-injures it, or he, blows his hamstring because he was overcompensating for the ankle injury. That can happen to any running back, regardless of how young they are, regardless of their injury history. It's just the inherent risk you get with drafting a running back in the first round or early in your drafts, period. So if you don't like that inherent risk, don't take a running back. Take a wide receiver. They're less likely to get injured. But with Christian McCaffrey, it is undeniable that when he is on the field, he is better than Jonathan Taylor from a points per game output. So I'm giving Jonathan Taylor the benefit of the doubt that he's a younger running back with less of an injury history by putting him at 101. But if we're going straight production versus production, it is Christian McCaffrey over Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. The production of CMC when he's been on the field, when he's been getting 50+% of the snaps, has been remarkable these past 4 years. You guys should see a tweet right now. I think Corey should put it up. But either way, I tweeted this out. People fading Christian McCaffrey really forget that this man in his last 4 seasons has averaged 25.85 PPR points per game this year, 30.13 PPR points per game in 2020. 29.39 in his record-breaking 2019 campaign, and then 25.1 in 2018. Again, the qualification here being games that he's played in 50+% of the snaps. Obviously, we saw this year had a couple games below that. They threw him in off of injury. They obviously had the Arizona game where they were blowing out the Cardinals early. If we're taking straight games where we've seen CMC in that CMC level workload, he has been the fantasy cheat code. He has been that generational asset. And I just mentioned the fact that Jonathan Taylor was a near 24 PPR point per game player this year and was easily the RB1 on the season. CMC across these past 4 years hasn't had a single season where he's averaged less than that. So keep that in mind when you decide, I want to pass on CMC because of these, Fugazi, hammy, and ankle sprains, whatever. Like, these are not predictable injuries, guys. Take the best players when they are on the field. And Christian McCaffrey has shown that when he is on the field, there is no greater asset in fantasy football.
Right. And to your point, you've probably lost your fantasy league by fading ticky-tacky injuries in the past, right? Because you probably faded Austin Ekeler or Joe Mixon this year because of those ticky-tacky injuries that they've dealt with. 2 years ago, you probably faded Dalvin Cook for the same reasons. So again, we cannot, as long as it's not an Achilles tear, which of course we're going to touch on in a minute, and ACL tears and serious injuries where there's legitimate research and backing medical research behind why they might suffer some more injuries in the future. These type of injuries, hamstrings, ankles, MCL sprains, whatever the case is, they are not predictive. They are inherently a risk of drafting running backs. So if we're going to assume health for everybody, Jonathan Taylor, Austin Ekeler, everybody that we're going to talk about, we have to assume it as well for Christian McCaffrey. Maybe it's you take it with a grain of salt because we've seen him get injured a little bit and that adds some more risk to him. But nonetheless, when he is on the field, he's the best running back in fantasy football. And like you said, it's really not even that close, especially in PPR formats. So Austin Ekeler, another guy that obviously will be a beneficiary of PPR formats as well. We saw him have a big game last night in the season finale thriller between the Chargers and the Raiders, which cost me about $2,600 on that Mike Williams touchdown catch at the end of the regulation because I was in first place in a underdog tournament. But I digress. Austin Ekeler obviously is going to be another guy that is highly thought of next year because he has a lot going right with his situation, right? He has Justin Herbert as his quarterback, who is going to produce a high-level offense. He has weapons on the outside, whether Mike Williams stays or not. And he has a high target share and a lot of touchdown opportunity, which helped carry him to a big season this year.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Again, Austin Ekeler is our 3. There is some competition between the couple guys we have behind him, but let's face it here. We talk about how good Justin Herbert is, probably at least one of the best up-and-coming young quarterbacks in the NFL, and you can make a case he's already probably top 5 in the league. Austin Ekeler is the most influential offensive piece he has. Keenan Allen is probably obviously his best overall receiver, but what Austin Ekeler does on the ground in the receiving game through the touchdown game, I mean, this guy is a remarkable real-life asset in what should be one of the top 5 to 8 offenses in the league in 2022. So I have no problems here picking him in the top 5 of your fantasy drafts, top 3 overall at the running back position. Again, the main concern here is the fact that this is a touchdown outlier season for him. I would like personally to attribute it to the fact that this offense got incredibly better. But I mean, you can make the case that he's probably not the type of player that's going to be scoring 20 touchdowns per year because he did in fact have 20 in the 16 games he played. However, I do think that can get offset by the fact that he didn't have as much receiving work this year as he has shown even in his past 2 years. So what could get offset in terms of the overall touchdown opportunity, I think we could see happen with the receiving opportunity. Again, this is a player that those past few weeks in general, again, he was dangling through injuries. We saw Justin Jackson, Josh Kelly, Larry Roundtree getting through work. I do think a fully healthy Austin Ekeler is still going to be a fine top 5 type of selection.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think there's any arguments to be made there, especially when you consider the fact that we talk about touchdown regression all the time and everybody talks about it. But realistically, like, what is going to be the major cause of that outside of simple, luck that he doesn't score a lot of touchdowns next year? Because Justin Herbert isn't going anywhere. Their offensive line is young and up and coming. They had a first round rookie at left tackle this year. That obviously was a big reason why we did like Austin Eckler's chances to improve on his touchdown game. And it was still a big concern for us, but it's the reason Austin Ekeler got better in that department is because his line got better, his offense got better. And you can't really say that they're going to get worse next year unless we, get a bunch of injuries on the offensive line or at quarterback or whatever the case is. So yeah, Austin Ekeler is our running back 3 overall as of right now. Running back 4 overall is Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry, again, was actually better on a points per game basis than Jonathan Taylor in the 8 games that he played. Outside of week 1, he was realistically just unstoppable for the entirety of the time he was on the field. We're going to get him back for the NFL playoffs coming up. And that could, sway some people next year in fantasy drafts, depending on what he does in the playoffs. Because if he goes out and he has, a 150-yard game in the divisional round and they make it to the AFC Championship and he, has a 130-yard game and 3 touchdowns, but maybe they lose or something like that. Either way, Derrick Henry is going to be a guy that is probably a lock for the top 5 overall, unless we see him like get injured again or something like that in the playoffs. This is a guy that simply just gets way too big of a workload on the ground to fail. Outside of injuries, again, which is an inherent risk of drafting running backs, there's no reason why Derrick Henry is not a top 5 pick next year.
Yeah, and again, the thing we got to look at here, because I'm for sure there's going to be comments on this video saying, how can you have Derrick Henry at 5? When he was on the field this year, he was by far the best player in fantasy. Well, we have to take in the inherent risk. People that want to fade Christian McCaffrey because he has only played 10 games these past 2 years, although he's been fighting ticky-tack type of injuries, completely ignore the fact that Derrick Henry is fighting a broken foot as a 250-pound between the tackles runner that is going to be close to 29 when the season starts again. He's going to be over 28 and a half years old when the season starts. There's just so much built-in risk to that type of pick, to the point where we can't take him in the top 3 overall picks, top 4 overall picks. If he falls to the mid-first, I'm more willing to take him because, again, we have seen when he's on the field, he is one of the best real-life runners. He scores a lot of touchdowns, and he's the heart and soul of that Titans offense. It's just, if you're picking Henry, you got to have some big balls because it could go downward pretty easily, considering the history of older running backs with over 1,500 career touches.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, we preach we're trying to win leagues, which is, to me, what Derrick Henry can offer you. We saw that this year when he was on the field, because I'm sure a lot of you guys that had Derrick Henry probably had a monster start to your fantasy season, and obviously maybe a big time fall off once he got injured. So again, Derrick Henry, as long as he's on the field next year, it's going to be hard to fade him. And I know the risks are there. The touch workload he's seen over his career, the age, the potential injury risk because of the age and the touch workload that he's seen over his career. That's all there with Derrick Henry. Like I said, this is the toughest part of navigating the running back landscape next year, in my opinion, is deciphering whether you want to take the guy that's done it already, like a Derrick Henry, or you want to bet on, some of these younger guys to ascend into that tier like we saw Jonathan Taylor do this year. So Alvin Kamara is our running back 5 overall. Alvin Kamara is another guy that is, fits into the same category as Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry, as a guy that has done it already. He's got multiple top 5 seasons under his belt already. This, in my opinion, was the floor for Alvin Kamara this year. We saw a revolving door at quarterback. We saw 3 different quarterbacks, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, and Trevor Siemian play this year. I think it's going to be Jameis Winston who's the primary quarterback next year. I really don't know. I think that's probably the direction that the Saints go. Maybe they, make a run at Watson or Wilson or Rodgers or whatever. Matt Corral, maybe they go for a rookie. Who the heck knows? But at this point, I'm just going to operate under the assumption that it is probably Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill under center again next year. And the New Orleans Saints dealt with a lot of injuries at wide receiver. They had no Michael Thomas all season. They really didn't have anybody worth a damn who could separate or command targets on their offense. So whether they just get Michael Thomas back, whether they get Michael Thomas back and they add somebody in the draft or in free agency, or Michael Thomas leaves and they get, a draft pick, whatever the case is, I think this offense is set to improve. The offensive line dealt with a whole bunch of injuries as well. And Alvin Kamara saw a career outlier in terms of touchdowns because of all these factors.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Alvin Kamara. And quite frankly, I think the discussion at Austin Ekeler at 3 includes Austin Ekeler, Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara. I think that's the exclusive list that you can put as the potential RB3 going into the year. Again, you mentioned the outlier of a season that we saw from Kamara in the touchdown department. Only 9 total touchdowns in the 13 games he played. For reference, 2020 in 15 games, he had 21 touchdowns. Got hurt in 2019. 2018, obviously, we saw the fact that he had 18 touchdowns. So this is a proven touchdown scorer. Just, again, the Saints offense wasn't that great this year. The quarterback position stunk for them. The offensive line, as I'm going to get into in a bit as well, was dealing with injuries all year, talking about Teron Armstead, Ryan Ramczyk, and Eric McCoy on the interior. This is an offense that is facing so much potential for improvement, getting those offensive linemen back, getting Michael Thomas back to help with their passing game overall. And obviously, again, if they get Jameis Winston or really any quarterback, it's going to be an upgrade over Taysom Hill. But the pros of taking an Alvin Kamara, again, you mentioned the floor he hit this year is really unlikely to continue because, again, we saw a incredible efficiency outlier for him. Obviously, 3.74 yards per carry. We were looking at a guy who was in the high 4s in his previous 4 seasons that he's played. This is usually a very efficient runner. Again, when half of your offensive line is missing most of the year, it's kind of hard to be consistent on the ground. And we saw that from Kamara. The more I take of it, though, is although he was more inefficient on the ground than we're used to seeing, this is by far his biggest workload in terms of ground game. I mean, we're talking about 240 rushing attempts in 13 games played. So for those of you that were interested or worried about Mark Ingram getting in there in the midseason, yada, yada, no, we did see Kamara actually, in fact, set career highs in terms of his overall carries while still being able to garner 67 targets in the receiving game, despite, again, this offense not really being willing to throw the ball with Marquez Callaway operating as their wide receiver 1 and Taysom Hill operating as their quarterback 1. So I do think there's so much potential here for Alvin Kamara to really be a guy that we rise on through the offseason as we see the Saints add to this offense. You talk about, again, Thomas, an ancillary receiver, a quarterback, offensive line getting healthy, you name it. The sky's the limit for what Alvin Kamara could be going into the year.
Yeah, if they get Michael Thomas back, Jameis Winston's the quarterback again next year, the offensive line gets healthy, and they drafted David Bell in the second round, then this is an offense that can really succeed more so in the passing game than they did this past year. Because even when Jameis Winston was on the field, this was still a team that wanted to run the ball. And obviously, Alvin Kamara's primary value has come from receiving game and touchdowns the past couple seasons that he's been an elite running back and still finished this year as a top 5 running back, probably one of the quietest top 5 running back seasons I've seen in a while. A lot of people probably, if you asked them where he finished, probably wouldn't have told you that he finished as a top 5 running back. Game. Yeah, in points per game. So because he only played 13 or 12 games this season. So that's where we're at with Alvin Kamara. He is our RB5. And again, we're starting to get into this separation of the older guys that have done it already, the veteran running backs. Now we're going to get into some younger guys. And again, I don't think there's any argument can be made that these older guys need to be ahead of the running of the younger guys. I think you can make the argument, in fact, that these younger guys should be ahead based on what we know about the running back position. So our running back 6 is actually Javonte Williams. And speaking of what we know about the running back position, what we saw from Jonathan Taylor this year, typically that league-winning legendary upside 20-plus point per game season that we are searching for when we take a running back in the first, second, or third round typically comes from younger running backs. The average age of those players is 23.88 years old. And that was before Jonathan Taylor did it this year. So that average age goes down to like 23 and a half years old. So these guys that we're about to talk about, Javonte Williams being the first guy of this list, we're kind of making some assumptions here. Obviously, we're assuming a quarterback upgrade. We're assuming Melvin Gordon moves on in free agency, but I think those are safe assumptions to make based on what we've seen from Javonte Williams when he's been on the field. The 1-game sample size that we have with Melvin Gordon out of the lineup, this is a guy that saw 7, 8, 9 targets. I can't even remember exactly how much receiving work he saw, but that was the big exciting factor about Javonte Williams, is that this guy isn't just, Nick Chubb, who's going to get 20 carries on the ground. This is a guy that can contribute to a heavy degree in the receiving game. We don't know who his quarterback's going to be. We don't know what they're going to do in this backfield, but as of right now, I'm assuming all that stuff is going to work out to some degree, and Javonte Williams, if that happens, is going to be a locked and loaded top 6 pick.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with this. Again, like, this is making the assumption that Melvin Gordon is gone this offseason, but realistically, from everything we've heard with Denver, they want to make Javonte Williams that bell cow type of back. And listen, we talked about the receiving game. This was a guy that was able to muster 53 receiving targets as a running back, as a rookie, despite really a disgusting offensive situation. Like, there's multiple games this year where Denver was worse than the league that week in terms of overall plays run. I do think that's going to get corrected, whether it's a rookie quarterback, a Jameis Winston, Jimmy Garoppolo type brought in. Regardless, they are going to fix that quarterback position because, simply put, you can't go into another offseason with Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater as your starter going into the year. So that's one issue that we think is going to solve itself. Again, mentioned Melvin Gordon. There's no real use for them to bring back Melvin Gordon, a 29-year-old running back, for another bridge deal because they obviously drafted Javonte Williams. And again, freeing up Melvin Gordon, getting Melvin Gordon out of that situation frees up 38 targets to a guy that was already guarding targets at an elite rate, despite only getting 51% of the snaps with Javonte Williams. You put him into that 3-down type of role that, Dalvin Cook type of role, 24, 25 opportunities, goal line work, receiving work. We can see Javonte Williams have that type of Dalvin Cook level of surgeons because a few years ago, we were talking about Dalvin Cook as a back-end second-round pick, young guy, kind of unproven, and then he just went out the next year and broke fantasy from a point-per-game outlook. I could see that being the case with Javonte Williams, only now we're more educated and understanding that these younger guys are more likely to be able to have that type of breakout season.
Right. And the uncertainty risk that you get from the fact that Javonte Williams has not had a top 5 season, like pretty much everybody we've already talked about has had, that helps you get Javonte Williams at a bigger discount because you probably won't have to draft him as the RB6 overall. Even if the best case scenario happens, Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback in Denver next year. They hire, Brian Daboll or something to run the offense, and they have no Melvin Gordon. I still think Javonte Williams isn't the RB6 overall in ADP. I think he would probably fit into the RB 8 to 10 range, even in that best case scenario.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. Stock up on Javonte Williams. And moving on from Javonte Williams, we got another running back that was actually in his 2021 rookie class. Guys, how are you ranking Javonte Williams over an already proven top 5 finisher at the running back position in Najee Harris? We like Harris too, to be honest. And Bush, I know you'll get into a little bit right there in terms of what really went and what happened this year with Najee Harris for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, and Harris was a guy I liked coming into the season too. And his path, again, I talked about this on the running back, league winning recap. His path to an elite finish was workload, right? He was a guy that there was games where Najee Harris didn't get off the field, like 100% of the snaps, 100% route participation. Like this guy led the league in pretty much every volume-based statistical category that you can think of for running backs. And again, he was a rookie running back too. So Tomlin has no concerns. He knows exactly how the running back position works. You draft a running back in the first round, he better not be leaving the field because that is, the type of draft capital that you put into that position, usually not the best idea, especially when you have offensive line injuries or issues and a quarterback position problem. We don't know what's going to happen in Pittsburgh. We don't know whether it's going to be a Jimmy Garoppolo or Russell Wilson, whatever the case is. I still think whoever it is probably going to be better than what Ben Roethlisberger put out this year. And I also think their offensive line could improve at least marginally going into next season. Again, we've already seen Najee Harris have a high target workload. We've already seen Najee Harris get a lot of work on the ground and get some goal line work. And we've even seen him flash some big play upside as well. So Najee Harris, to me, he has to be inside at least the top 8 overall running backs just because of the workload and because I think he also can get a lot better as a player as well.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. I mean, this was a guy, again, who averaged, get this, almost 24 touches per game. 24 touches per game. I mean, this guy had 384 touches or 381 touches, in the 17 games he played. That is phenomenal workload. And again, we mentioned they could have that quarterback upgrade. You can add to the offensive line. This could be a more dynamic offense because let's be honest here, on the workload he had, the fact that he only had 10 touchdowns just kind of shows you what the situation was like in Pittsburgh. If this offense is able to get better and he ups that touchdown area to, 14, 15, 16, we could be looking at a guy who has, again, legitimate top 3 level upside, Derrick Henry level upside.
Right, because he finished in the fantasy season, because I didn't actually account for the last game of the season. He had 16.0 half PPR points per game, which is about 4 points shy of that legendary upside that we're chasing. And again, if you get a Jimmy Garoppolo in there, maybe they draft an offensive lineman to help out with that line. They go from, the 26th or whatever ranked offense that they were this year to about the 18th, 15th or something like that. Even at that point, you're getting a big time upgrade in terms of Najee Harris's touchdown potential and that volume that he's getting becoming more efficient volume and more valuable volume than it was this year, where he wasn't averaging a high yards per carry. Let's just call a spade a spade. He wasn't being, overly efficient on each of his touches. There was a lot of runs that you guys saw this year where Najee Harris was getting tackled in the backfield after making 2 guys miss or whatever. But that's just what's going to happen when you have a bad offensive line and a bad quarterback. Hopefully they're able to upgrade those things to some decent degree. Another guy in this kind of range and in this mold of a young running back that we believe in is DeAndre Swift. We talked about him coming into this year as a guy that had, top 12 upside. He finished as the RB11 in points per game with 13.8 in half PPR. Obviously in full PPR, I believe he finished a little bit higher than that as well. And despite suffering an injury at the end of the year, he, had a sprained AC joint on Thanksgiving. This was a guy that was legitimately posting some of the best running back target numbers in the league. This was a guy who was leading the league in targets when he got injured. So DeAndre Swift, to me, the path is, again, very simple. They need to upgrade the offense, whether it's replacing Jared Goff, getting wide receiver help, whatever the case is. DeAndre Swift's touchdown potential was pretty much all self-created. Every time DeAndre Swift had a touchdown or had a big play, it was all him. Like, he had to do everything. If his offense can assist him by, seeing the offensive line progress, he had a rookie right tackle this year, getting a better quarterback, getting some more receiving help, that's going to help his workload go from a good one to an efficient one.
Yeah, no, again, I fully agree. This is a guy that when he was healthy, again, you even if you factor in that Chicago game and factor out those last 2 games, let's be honest here, the Lions weren't really competing for anything at that point. They really had no incentive to give DeAndre Swift his rollback coming off an injury. But we saw a guy that was able to garner 70 targets in those first 11 games he played. That is phenomenal. And again, you mentioned this is a guy that was averaging over 6 targets per game on the year. And what we like most about him, again, he is a young ascending talent. He gets a bunch of receiving work. He can create on his own. And when we're looking at the Detroit Lions, there's maybe not even one terrible team in the NFL that I trust more in rebounding with what I've seen from this Detroit Lions franchise. Again, Dan Campbell looks like he's doing a great job in motivating these guys, getting them to play their best ball. They have a lot of assets available to them, whether it's the cap space, whether it's the draft capital to be able to add to this team. And I don't think this is going to be a 3-win team next year. Again, we're talking about a team that went, 3-13-1 this year. I think this could be closer to a 6-7 win type team if they add to this roster. And if we're getting 6-7 wins from a running back that was already this involved in the receiving game, that was already able to create touchdowns on his own and was getting this amount of workload in an offense that realistically can only go up from where it is right now, you could see a potential Alvin Kamara type breakout from DeAndre Swift because he is the level of talent to be able to do that.
Yeah, I definitely do not disagree. Again, we are talking about a couple more running backs that are in that veteran workload. We've seen them do it already type of mold. And a guy that, again, maybe you guys think this is too low. We're trying to project forward. We're not trying to see what happened this year, but we have Joe Mixon at 9. And this is the only time in his career we've seen him finish as a top 5 running back. We have a 6-year sample size of Joe Mixon being in the NFL. We still have him at 9 because this Bengals offense is probably not going to get any worse next year with Jamar Chase in his 2nd year, T. Higgins in his 3rd season, Joe Burrow, again, 2 years removed from an ACL tear, because I think a lot of people forget Joe Burrow was coming off an ACL tear. Joe Mixon's primary value, his primary path to elite running back potential was the touchdown ability, and that is not going away. So I don't want to take away that factor from Joe Mixon, but at the same time, it was an outlier season for him from that perspective, and he wasn't efficient on his touches. So what we're talking about with Joe Mixon is a guy that could be a trap next year. That's all I'm going to say about Joe Mixon. I know it's not necessarily, the smartest because we faded Joe Mixon last year and he made us look stupid, but that's just how I feel about Joe Mixon. It's like 27-year-old running back that averaged 4 yards per carry is usually not who I want to bet on.
I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that because he is almost exactly a year younger than Ezekiel Elliott. And the same cases we were making for Ezekiel Elliott are basically going to be the same cases we hear from Joe Mixon this offseason. There's a lot of inherent risk on really taking a guy that, let's be honest, isn't going to be an efficient runner of the football, isn't going to be an efficient player overall. Again, the touchdowns are going to be there because this offense has shown itself to be great, but everybody's forgetting the fact that this was also, in fact, a touchdown outlier season for Joe Mixon in itself. Now, do I think he's going to be closer to this season than his other career marks? Yeah, for sure. This offense has proven itself to be one of the, top 5 to 7 units in the league, but there's just so much risk here in terms of on the field efficiency, maybe seeing some touchdown regression, coupled with the fact that this has been a guy that has dealt with his, we don't want to talk about Fugazi injuries, but he's dealt with his nags, snags, bruises, whatever you name it throughout the years. And this past season, we were able to see him fully be on the field. we can't really make the case for him to be that guy next year. Again, I'm not going to hold it completely against him because, again, I still like Derrick Henry. I still like Christian McCaffrey. I still like other guys that are dealing with these issues. But it's still something to be aware of when, you're making that decision between Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, or realistically any of the receivers at this spot too.
Yeah, this is a big time like receiver pivot for me. Like once I get down to this tier of running backs, I'm much more likely to take a much safer asset at wide receiver in next year's drafts. Again, Joe Mixon is teetering on that area where Ezekiel Elliott was at last year. That is typically when we see running backs fall off in efficiency, and Joe Mixon has not been efficient even to this point in his career. So if he's going to fall off in efficiency at all, maybe deal with some more injuries, that is definitely a concern. But again, we don't want to hold it against him too much because we're willing to buy into Christian McCaffrey. We're willing to buy in to Derrick Henry with the same real concerns because they play running back. They all have the same type of injuries and same type of issues. So speaking of another guy that's dealt with some nagging injuries is Dalvin Cook. Again, he will be another year older. He will have more tread on his tires. How much can we really trust Dalvin Cook now with, I'm assuming Clint Kubiak and that rushing scheme that made Dalvin Cook so effective is no longer going to be there. As we record this, Mike Zimmer was fired this morning, as was the Vikings GM. So is anything going to change? Is Kirk Cousins going to be gone? We have a lot of question marks about the Vikings offense in general. And how is Dalvin Cook going to fit into that area? Because has been a guy that is not only dealing with nagging injuries the past couple of years, also has a legal situation that we haven't really talked about in a while as well.
Yeah, no, I fully agree here. Again, you mentioned 27 years old, has dealt with the nagging snags these past couple of years. Again, I'm not going to hold it too far against him, but we have seen that even this year, Dalvin Cook wasn't even remotely close to the same player when he was on the field as we saw in those previous 2 years where he was in fact a league-winning type of asset. I mean, this guy was still being able to get the workload. It's just the problem was the offense was more inconsistent. The offense transitioned to more of a pass-happy attack, which it should when you have Justin Jefferson, KJ Osborne, and obviously Adam Thielen proving themselves on the outside, to the point that Dalvin Cook was making his hay, making his bread on the fact that he was able to score over a touchdown per game. Obviously, in that 2020 season, he scored 17 in the 14 games. The biggest takeaway was the fact that that total was only at about half per game this past year. And realistically, we can't really put Cook into that top 3 type of ceiling that he was a couple years ago. Again, if you're to say that this guy finishes like the RB5, RB6 when he stayed healthy, sure, I could probably see that scenario. But again, at the end of the day, if I'm taking a running back in my top 15, I want to make sure that they have that legitimate 20 half PPR ceiling. And I just don't see that from Cook happening anymore.
Right. And this is a guy that finishes the RB8 and half PPR points per game when he played this year. But again, he only played 12 games, which has been a concern for him. More volume, more tread on the tires. That is basically the argument for Dalvin Cook. I think you can make the argument that he belongs up near 6, near 5 in these rankings, but I also think you can make the argument that we might even have him too high with all the risks that are presented to us. Number 11 we have here is another running back from the 2017 draft class, 3 straight in a row. Leonard Fournette was the first running back off the board in that class to the Jacksonville Jaguars in the top 5. He is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. At least he has been this past year. We're kind of assuming that he's back with Tampa Bay if we're going to rank him inside our top 12, because Leonard Fournette, when he was on the field, was basically getting every ounce of the workload that you wanted for him. He was getting, nearly 6.5 targets per game. For a running back like Leonard Fournette, who was not thought of to be an elite receiving back, he now has 2 seasons or 3 seasons where he's been heavily involved in the receiving game. Tom Brady clearly trusts him in that regard, as does Bruce Arians. He was a guy that was completely taking over the 2-minute drill, long down and distance work, and the goal line work in the primary ball carrier role for a top 3 scoring offense in the NFL. So if you're going to be that involved in that great of an offense, and he also looked good this year and was efficient in his own right, more efficient than Joe Mixon and Ezekiel Elliott were this year. So that is where I see kind of Leonard Fournette fitting in. Again, there's going to be some younger guys that we were going to talk about after him that you can make the argument for. And again, obviously this is all assuming he's back with Tampa Bay, which I do think is likely to happen.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And it's funny because when you were to talk about these 2017 drafted running backs, not a lot of people realize that Fournette's on the same age plane as, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, and Alvin Kamara, but he is the same age as them. Yeah, they're in the same draft class. It's funny because everybody associates him, washed up Leonard Fournette, got a second chance with the Bucs. Now he's like, okay.
It's because he looked like he was 40 when he got drafted.
Literally, though. Yeah, he's got that full beard. He's ready to go. But honestly, this guy surprised everybody this year. He looked way more efficient as a runner. He was obviously involved tremendously in the receiving game. And again, 10 touchdowns in 14 games. Would you be at all shocked if, Tom Brady, instead of 43 touchdowns, threw 38 next year and Leonard Fournette was able to contribute more on the goal line? I wouldn't. Like, Leonard Fournette has actually been good in that regard this year, and there should be really no reason to see this guy fall off a cliff next year if he is back in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, no doubt. I don't think there's too much to talk about with Leonard Fournette. Obviously, if he goes to a different team, this is a whole separate discussion, because then we don't have the top 5 offensive line. We don't have the MVP candidate quarterback. We don't have the 3-down workhorse role with all the inside the 5 work like he's had in Tampa Bay. But again, if we are assuming he's back in Tampa Bay, to have him ranked inside of our top 12, another guy that fits into a great offense that closes out our top 12, and then we'll quickly kind of spout off some honorable mentions, is Cam Akers, running back from the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, a lot of assumptions that would have to be made here. He is coming off of a torn Achilles, but the fact that he's already on the field and played last week kind of gives me less concern about his injuries. I don't know about you. I don't think it's a huge deal for him to come back next year and be back to his full workload. That's obviously going to come from the trust of Sean McVay and all the offensive coaching staff if they think he can handle that kind of workload coming off of an injury. But depending on what happens this year in the playoffs, we're either going to get a big discount on Cam Akers or he's going to be right back to where he was going before he even got injured.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because, again, we have him ranked as our 12 consensus right now. But I can tell you, in our final installment of rankings in late August, that number is either going to be way higher. Cam Akers has a full healthy offseason, contributed in the playoffs, looked every bit Cam Akers, and looks well over that Achilles tear. Or it's going to be way lower in the fact that he shows struggles in the playoffs. We don't hear good news. Maybe it's committee going into the year. This is one right now, balancing out all of the range of outcomes for Cam Akers, kind of lands us on that 12 to 15 area. But again, if we had a good offseason, if we know he's going to be the bell cow going into next year, I wouldn't be shocked if anybody had him even close to, top 8 overall running back type of territory, because that's where he was getting ranked going into this year. And I don't think really anything's changed about the situation. Maybe other than the fact that Matthew Stafford has done even more for this offense than really we could have even anticipated.
Right. And Cooper Kupp is obviously a lot better than we anticipated as well. So with Cam Akers, it's going to come down to a number of factors. If you just look at Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel, when they got the Cam Akers workload, basically, which is what we expected for Cam Akers coming into the year, they had 9 games between the two of them of 15 plus half PPR points. And again, let me repeat, it's Darrell Henderson and Sony Michel. Like, these guys are not superstar talents at the running back position. They looked pretty good in spurts and in specific games, but Cam Akers is still the best running back in this backfield. And not only that, but I believe Sony Michel is a free agent after this year as well.
Yep.
I don't even think he'll be back if Cam Akers is fully healthy. Darrell Henderson's still under contract. I'm expecting Cam Akers to be the feature back, get the full 3-down workload for a top 5 scoring offense. Matthew Stafford in his second year in a new system, he'll probably be an MVP candidate quarterback yet again next year. Cooper Kupp coming off of almost a record-breaking season as well. I think it's really hard to deny the fact that Cam Akers has just as much ceiling at 22 years old still, by the way, as anybody.
Yeah, for sure. So overall, again, that would be our top 12. You guys will obviously see it in the description. There'll be a graphic to kind of show you our full top 12. The biggest honorable mentions that we have, the guys that we each either had in our top 15 or on the cusp of our top 15 that obviously didn't make this top 12. The first name for me is going to be J.K. Dobbins, running back from the Baltimore Ravens. Again, we were able to see that this Ravens running back core, despite having Devontae Freeman, freaking Latavius Murray at times, like gross old running backs in this core getting workloads, we're still able to be fantasy relevant at times this year, RB2 relevant. And we know when J.K. Dobbins is on the field, this is one of the most efficient running backs in the entire NFL. And we saw this year, again, this offense completely opened up when healthy, when they were able to push the ball down the field. Could J.K. Dobbins work into that receiving workload that we were really hearing rumors of all offseason last year? Greg Roman was saying, we want to get Dobbins more involved in the receiving game, want to get him more involved in the receiving game. And he was true about every single other thing he said about the offense in terms of attacking downfield, to the point where if Dobbins is getting a 40, 50, 60 target workload out of this backfield run by Lamar Jackson, we could be looking at a guy that has legitimate top 6, top 7 Alvin Kamara level upside, because we know the touchdowns are going to be there. If the Ravens are fully healthy, if Lamar Jackson is running this offense, there's going to be a ton of touchdown opportunity available to J.K. Dobbins. The main concern here is going to be how he recovers from that knee, because it wasn't a normal, typical ACL tear where you also have the MCL affected. In fact, I believe it was the LCL that was also affected, so the exterior of the knee, which, again, is a little bit less conventional than if the MCL was intact. So remains to be seen how he kind of recovers. But from what I know now, I'm not too concerned about the knee injury. I'm actually less concerned overall about the ACL of Dobbins than I am about the Achilles of Akers. But obviously that's so subject to change if Akers goes out and balls in the postseason.
Right. And this is a guy we saw have 9 touchdowns as a rookie, closed out his rookie season with a lot of scoring opportunity. The framework for him is the Alvin Kamara framework, right? We could see this guy. We saw Devontae Freeman have like 8, 6, 5, 4 target games over like a 6-week stretch of being the starting running back. How much would J.K. Dobbins have gotten if he was on the field, who's a way, way more efficient, way better receiver than Devontae Freeman at this point in his career? I think J.K. Dobbins could have had a 70, 80, 90, 100 target potential this year in this Ravens offense. And this is a guy that playing for the Ravens and playing with Lamar Jackson is always a threat to have 15 plus touchdowns combined through the air and on the ground.
Yeah. Like, let's not forget that this guy was over 6 yards per carry and over 6.6 yards per catch as a rookie. 158 opportunities in the 15 games he played and was a top 24 PPR running back. That is phenomenal.
Right. Exactly. So he is a guy that definitely, assuming all the health is, 100%, coming into the season, is a guy that is probably going to fit his way into this range. A guy also that we had a lot of high hopes for coming into this season was Antonio Gibson. A lot of nagging injuries kind of, derailed his season as well, probably led to him having a bit of a decreased workload. I do think with 100% certainty, if he was 100% healthy, no turf toe, no shin injuries this year, we saw his workload potential when he got, 30 plus touches in 2 straight weeks this season. I think that is the framework for Antonio Gibson. He is a volume play. I don't know if they're going to continue to hand that volume to him. They might be like, okay, every time we've given this guy a lot of volume, he's kind of gotten, banged up and dealt with some injuries. Either way, I think this is a guy that is guaranteed 20 plus touches next season for a team that should be better than they were this year. David Montgomery, another guy that I think is probably fitting into this like top 15 range, just based on the workload that he has. He has a 2nd-year quarterback next year as opposed to a rookie and like half of Andy Dalton and Nick Foles this past season. And David Montgomery in his own right has gotten better each and every year, has improved his workload as well. He's gotten finally the 2-minute drill, long down and distance receiving work that he wasn't getting earlier in his career when he was just a primary ball carrier.
Yeah, for sure. And guys outside of this top 15, we're just going to quickly say their name. We're not going to get too in depth of them, but Nick Chubb, obviously a mainstay in that fringe top 12 area. The concerns there are going to be the receiving work. Aaron Jones, getting older, less workload this year. Saquon Barkley, have no clue what the fuck to make out of that offense. Ezekiel Elliott, less efficient this year, dealing with that knee injury. Hard to project. And then finally wrapping up, Travis Etienne, Josh Jacobs, and Elijah Mitchell, which for Josh Jacobs, we kind of know what he is. But I don't know, offensive
He's like
concerns.
a B-Tech David Montgomery, basically, at this point.
Pretty much. And then Etienne and Mitchell obviously being those 2nd-year rookies that really, realistically, going into the year, I could see us having in that fringe top 15 area if nothing really changes in their respective backfields.
Yep, for sure. So if you guys enjoyed this video, as always, like, comment, subscribe. If you are new to the channel, we are going to be pumping out, the wide receiver rankings tomorrow, way too early wide receivers. We're going to talk about our biggest lessons learned from the 2021 fantasy football season, and then close out the week with the dynasty decisions as well. And then next week, we're going to start getting into real dynasty content. Some of the guys that you guys are looking towards buying, some of the moves that you should be making, sell candidates, stashes, all that good stuff will be talked about in the coming weeks. And then we're right into rookie season. We're going to have, the Senior Bowl is going to be in a couple weeks as well, which is really the start of the draft cycle. So peace out, guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Why you need the money?